All right, let's go ahead and get started. I got here a little bit early to try to deal with all the technical issues that plagued us last week. And we found a workaround. I won't say it's fixed, but it's functional. So you've all owned a car like that, right? That it wasn't fixed quite right, but you could drive it. So that's about where we are with the slideshow this morning. So let's pray when we start. Father God, thank you again for gathering us. Thank you for your word that we get to study. I want to pray that something written 3,400 years ago in a completely different culture, a completely different setting, to a different people, nevertheless would come alive for us, that we could understand foundational things and principles and things that do in fact carry over, that reveal your goodness, your wisdom, your glory, your kindness, and that we could then walk differently and better and in a way that pleases you in the midst of a culture that would absolutely mock and does mock books like Leviticus. It's a good book with helpful things. We pray that we see them today. In Jesus' name, amen. In fact, we're gonna end today. How many of you know who Laura Schlesinger is? Dr. Laura. She's kind of famous. She's got one of the more popular syndicated radio shows, I guess. I think her background is Jewish. She commented some time back, might have been several years ago, because the blog I saw, I didn't see how recent it was, about the sin of homosexuality. And of course that stirs up a hornet's nest when you do that in our culture. And so somebody wrote what was meant to be a very indicting and humiliating response to her, but it was hilarious. And so we're going to end with that, just kind of whet your appetite a little bit, about, what countries can I and can I not buy slaves from, and how much should I pay? Kind of questions like that, going back to Leviticus, because if you're going to take sexual ethics from a book like Leviticus, well, why don't you take all the other ethics as well? So there's actually a good point in studying this book, because that's the culture you live in. If they say, well, why is this in your Bible? Why do you still read it? Why do you even think about it? Maybe you should have an answer that goes beyond, well, it just tells me what's right and wrong, because some of those things we don't do anymore for good reason. So let's go ahead and get started. And Lisa's not here today, but Kathy, I just want to thank you publicly for helping last week. Even though we didn't get it fixed, that's not your fault. I'm not sure what went wrong, but I spent the week trying to figure out how not to have that happen again, and I think we got it. So I've been taught, I think rightly, you probably have been too, that there are different standards for church membership than for church leadership. We have a statement of faith. If you're going to join the church, you should be largely in agreement with that statement of faith, and especially on the key points. Like if you're not quite sure you're settled on the virgin birth or the divinity of Christ or the authority of scriptures, that probably needs to, that needs to be settled before you would join. But then there's other things that, okay, you're not quite sure about this or that, okay, we can work with that maybe. That's kind of the minimum to join. The standard's quite a bit higher if you want to be a leader. You need to pretty much subscribe to the statement of faith as it's written. We're going to ask you questions that go well beyond what's said explicitly in there to see what your depth of knowledge is and whether you can integrate the scriptures for those things. And so you need statement of faith, more or less, for membership, statement of faith as it is, plus a little bit for leadership. And then for membership, you need some kind of a testimony that you really are converted, your life is different, you're not the same person you were before Christ. That would be a minimum. For leadership, you need a lot more. Words like, or phrases like above reproach show up in 1 Timothy 3, etc. I'm putting this before you because we're going to be in Leviticus 21, and it does pretty much exactly the same thing. It's done talking about the people. The people are no longer in view. That was the last few weeks when we were in Leviticus, 17 through 20, where here's what people may and may not do. And now they're going to talk about what the priests may or may not do, and they're going to talk about the priests at two levels. There's the ordinary, everyday Levitical priest. Here are some restrictions and some commands that affect him. And then it's going to start talking about the chief, who is the priest, who is chief among his brothers. Talking about now the high priest, the chief priest, and the standards are even higher for him. And so it's what we find in the New Testament, which we'll look at in just a moment here, is really prefigured in Leviticus. That there are standards for membership, there are standards for leadership, and there are standards that go up as the responsibilities go up. So let's look at these. It makes sense too, even if you're not a believer. How many of you have worked for a boss that you knew more than they did? How many of you worked for a boss that says, do as I say, not as I do? Oh, yeah. Those are unpleasant experiences. I mean, I truly don't think that a human being resents being under leadership, as long as it's good leadership. I love having a good boss. And most of my life, I've been blessed with good bosses. They were good at what they did, they were fair, they set a pretty good example. And when an exception came along, you knew it. So it's what God has woven into our experience and woven into life is that leadership should be ahead of you, pulling you along, not behind you saying, hey, keep moving in that direction. Well, I don't. And so what the Bible does, I think, is also something that God has woven into our everyday experiences. Here's one of the standards from the New Testament. Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. In what ways should a teacher be judged? So somebody says, I want to teach, I want to lead, I want to teach a Sunday school, or I want to stand in the pulpit, or whatever. In what ways? There's at least two that they should be judged, right?
Example of his family.
Integrity.
Okay, so the family thing, well, what's their example? Because they might have all knowledge, like 1 Corinthians warns about that. You can have all knowledge, and your life be a mess, and it's worth nothing. So you need to keep your family in order. You need to show that what you know actually gets applied in practical ways, because that's what you're trying to help other people with. And what Maureen, did you say?
Integrity.
Okay, integrity, which I would argue would be sort of similar to that. It's your witness, it's your lifestyle. So so first off, you need to know something if you want to be a teacher, right? Mm-hmm. And I would argue that part of the higher standard is that it's one thing if a layperson makes a mistake in doctrine. They made a mistake in doctrine, we all do. It's another thing if you said, I've studied, I know this stuff, I'm going to teach you, and I teach you the mistake. That's something I'll be held accountable for. And so Heidi will tell you there's a lot of late nights over minutia. I'll give you an example of one coming to it today, where of saying, does this mean this or does it mean that? And it bugs me if I can't get a definitive answer, because I want to be able to say something to you and I don't want it to be wrong, because I'll be held to a higher standard. So you should be held to a higher standard doctrinally, and you should be held to a higher standard with family, with integrity, basically with the example that you give. If this stuff isn't working for me, why should I expect it to work for you? Would be another way to say it. So you've got that. You've also got what Paul says in 1 Timothy. Keep a close watch on yourself and on the teaching. Persist in this, for by doing so you will save both yourself and your hearers. So there you have your personal conduct. Keep a close watch on yourself. How are you walking? What is the example you're setting? And keep a close watch on your teaching. And it's not a one-time deal. You persist in this. This needs to become your lifestyle. For by doing so, you will save both yourself. Now, that's a really interesting statement. What's the implication if you don't keep a close watch on yourself or on your teaching?
You drift away.
You may make shipwreck of faith. Yeah. So you keep a close watch on those things. That will save yourself and your hearers. So those are the two areas again that the New Testament says you need to ramp it up if you want to lead. You need to have good doctrine, good teaching, the ability to communicate it, and you need to be able to live it out in a way that others kind of say, okay, I see them at work in that. It's not perfection. It doesn't mean that leadership never makes a mistake. We make mistakes all the time. It means you try to keep them confined to areas that don't wreck things. That okay, we're all going to make mistakes. We're not going to get everything right all the time, but we're responsible to do our best. And contrast this, by the way, with what happened on Pentecost. Do you remember? How many people were saved?
3,000.
3,000. And they're welcomed into the church that day. Pretty much guarantee you they weren't all carefully vetted. But here's the text. Peter said to them, "Repent and be baptized, every one of you, in the name of Jesus Christ for the forgiveness of your sins, and you will receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. For the promise is for you and for your children, and for all who are far off, everyone whom the Lord our God calls to himself." And with many other words he bore witness and continued to exhort them, saying, "Save yourselves from this crooked generation." So those who received his word were baptized, and there were added that day about 3,000 souls. And so the criteria: repent, believe, be baptized, hear the gospel message, etc., and you can join the church. But they were not ushered in immediately into leadership. And some that were later on turned out to be a mistake, which gives me a certain amount of comfort that even the early apostolic age did not have perfect judgment in who they gave responsibilities to. Some of them turned out not to be who you'd hope they would be. So, now Leviticus. Here's where we're going to be. We've been working our way up the left side. Day of Atonement. The last few weeks have been right here with personal laws. How should one of those 3,000 people that were saved in that day behave? Lots of information, lots of admonition and restriction and teaching in there. And now we're going to go to how should the priests behave? And it is a higher standard. So that's where we'll begin. There's 2 entire chapters. We're going to focus on 21 and just do a very quick summary near the end of 22. But there is a higher standard. So here it begins. And the Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the priests, the sons of Aaron, and say to them, no one shall make himself unclean for the dead among his people, except for his closest relatives, his mother, his father, his son, his daughter, his brother, or his virgin sister, who is near to him because she has had no husband. For her he may make himself unclean." Need to remind ourselves, is being unclean a sin?
No.
No, it's a ceremonial thing. Someone dies in your house, someone's got to deal with the body. And it's no sin. People are going to die, and you have multiple generational homes where you got grandma and grandpa and mom and dad and the kids and maybe some grandkids or whatever like that. But you've got people that are going to die in your home. There were no old folks' homes. There were no convalescent homes. The family took care of them, and so they're going to die. It's no sin to take the body and get it out of the house, to prepare it for burial, to do whatever their customs and things were going to do. But the priest had limitations. He was not supposed to normally be involved in the burial of a dead body, with a few exceptions. Your mom, your dad, your sister, your brother, let's make sure I get them right, closest relatives, son, daughter, brother, or sister. But if the sister's married, not part of your household anymore, somebody else takes care of her body if she passes away. Does that strike you as cold-hearted? I mean, let me give you an example. Jake is one of my best friends. If Jake passes away, I'm going to be at the funeral. Don't tell me I can't go. But this is kind of like, be careful where you go and how close you get to dead people, even if they're your best friend or your favorite uncle. That strike you as cold?
Yeah.
It does, okay. Maureen?
I thought it was you weren't supposed to touch them,
Yeah.
not
In the presence of,
It doesn't say that, does it?
yeah.
I mean, in other places it does talk, don't touch the dead, et cetera, et cetera. But even here it seems to be, it's more general. No one shall make himself unclean for the dead among his people.
Well, that begs the question, define unclean for the dead. Because I thought unclean for the dead meant touching.
So let's go with that so that we can still stick with this. You can't touch the body. You just have to stand back.
Why wouldn't you touching a dead body anyway? Yeah.
Somebody is. I mean, you're not gonna board up the house and move.
Yeah, when you have to get them ready,
Somebody has to get them ready, somebody
I
has.
personally wouldn't be doing it, because I have no mother, father, sister, brother, or children. I don't have any of those, so I wouldn't be
Okay,
doing
but
it.
I do.
Yeah.
I've got all of those.
Right.
And so if I were a Levitical priest, I'm looking at this and going, my mother's died, I can't touch her.
But I don't see where that translates to you not going to Jake's funeral.
I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
So the point you're making is that I can be completely involved right up to not touching the corpse.
Completely involved.
See, I mean, my point is,
Completely involved.
okay, and that's the point. That's the point. For some reason, they're putting a distance here. Doesn't make any difference how much you love the person, how close a friend they were. There's some sort of a distance here that they're putting. And so if nothing else, let's just ask the question, why?
What about disease?
Could be disease, but now, should I be indifferent? Robert, can you handle this diseased body? Because I don't want to get sick.
Why did you raise that question in my direction?
Bravo.
Kurt, would you
Yeah,
mind having?
go ahead.
Because he won't. I
All
can
right.
tell we get no cooperation from Robert. Here's what I'm trying to get at, is our God is a God of life. He gives life. And so there's nothing sinful about handling a dead body. It's necessary. But the priest, as a representative of God to the people, and as a representative of the people to God, as that mediator, he is not supposed to be around death. He's not supposed to touch dead things. It's one of the things that will make him unclean and unable to do his duties then. If he becomes unclean, he doesn't get to go to the tabernacle for some period of time. There's a washing, there's a waiting, etc., and then he can go back to work again. But Leviticus says, don't do that. Don't make yourself unclean except mom, dad, brother, sister, children, etc. Darren.
Just maybe I'm missing something, but wife is not mentioned. Is that? Just kind of curious.
I was thinking that even as I was from memory listening to things off and say, Heidi, I'm sorry, you're just out of luck. It doesn't say, does it? That's an interesting observation. I hadn't made that.
The wives don't know.
My wife will outlive me, I think, yeah.
But it also means that his sister, who's married, she doesn't have anybody either.
You weren't mentioned.
I mean, it's,
She has a husband.
Ooh, no,
he can't do that.
Yeah.
oh, I see what you're saying. But hopefully she's in a household. I mean, okay, first off, if you're looking for exhaustive, we might be trying to slice the onion a little thin here. There's a principle. God is holy. He is clean. He is a God of life, not a God of death. And so the people that represent him, the people that serve him, the people that act as mediators between the people and God are supposed to limit their association and their contact with death. It's symbolic. Let's just be real clear. This is not hygiene. It's not, even though I appreciate the humor in what you said, it's not about, what if they're sick or something like that. It doesn't say that. This is just about the fact that there's symbolism in death, and you're not supposed to embrace that particular symbolism if you are serving a God of life.
Does this shed a new light on Jesus' comment, let the dead bury the dead? I just wonder.
I love it. I thought of that same thing last night, and I'm not sure if you didn't hear. Remember, somebody comes to Jesus and says, "Hey, tell my brother, whatever, to divide my inheritance with me, or whatever like that, or my father to do it." And Jesus answers him, "Let the dead bury their dead." I'm not sure, but I thought of the same thing. You give us a lot that
I
one.
thought you said, this is more important than that, but evidently, my religion is as well.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. Let the dead bury their dead. You come and follow me.
That's what it
Yeah.
is.
Excuse me. I told you we didn't have all these problems fixed just yet. There we go. Okay. Let's roll on. I think we'll see more here. So we talked about the ours.
Could there have been pagan cults too, just like when Paul said, don't touch food tainted
Sure.
by
Yeah.
pagan gods? Could there have been a
Yeah, if you know the food's been sacrificed to an idol, you probably should stay away from it, even though there's no such thing as an idol, and if you don't know, who cares? But yeah, he says don't intentionally become involved in pagan practices, and that's where I wanted to go next with this. Egyptians are famous for what? Embalming. Big deal about when you die in Egypt. You know, you get embalmed so the body stays preserved, and they put any items of value that they think you might need in the next life, and then they've got all kinds of rituals for that. We're going to see in a minute that other cultures believed in shedding their blood, their own blood for the dead. That was part of their worship of God, etc. And so we're gonna see that actually on the next slide here. But Israel, and we've seen this throughout Leviticus, one of the things is, you guys, he says to Israel, are in danger of either developing or retaining things that the cultures around you do. Then I don't want you to do that. I want you to be a different people. And so even death was handled differently. So here's the slide. This is just continuing on Leviticus 21. He shall not make himself unclean as a husband among his people, and shall profane himself. Pause right there for a minute. It's a weird word for husband there. It's not saying if you do this, you're going to have some problem with your relationship with your wife. It says a husband among your people. The priest had husbandly duties with the people, to care for them, to lead them, to, in that sense, kind of be head of a household, with a household, being the household of God in this case. So it's just a really interesting and I think informative word to say the priest should be looked at by the people as something of a husband, takes responsibility for them, cares for them, etc. Mandy.
I was just gonna say, my verse 4 says from NIV, he must not make himself unclean for people related to him by marriage, and so defile himself.
Yeah, except among his people, and so profane himself. I understand, and there's a reason I don't use the NIV. Yeah, and I'm serious. You go to different translations. Okay, that's because the
Well, I
New
was
American
gonna say maybe
Standard.
that's talking about the wife.
I know that is, and I don't agree with it. And the reason I don't is that the word for husband, if you go back one slide, let's see.
At the bottom.
Yeah, there it is, that one. Would you agree that that is a married person to that sister, right?
Yes.
Okay. Different word. I think he means something different. And we won't get stuck on that. But would you agree that the responsibilities of a priest, of a leader like that, are husband-like? You're to lead the people, care for them, provide for them, be an example to them. Very much what a husband and a father would do in a family, which is one of the reasons also why, if you're not doing it with your family, you don't get to do it with the church. And so I'm pretty sure that that's what's in view there. And Mandy, please don't receive this wrongly. Until you pull out the Hebrew and say, well, why are those words different? And
When you click
among
on the
his
little-
people.
It has a little dot, 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 and when you click on that, it says, or unclean as a leader among his people.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Good. I'm glad it's got the note in there. And that's, I'm sorry?
I didn't hear that.
She said it's got a little dot, dot, dot in like a parenthetical thought, or unclean as a leader among the people. And I do agree. I think that's a good parenthetical note to say that the husbanding in view there is not the husband from the verse before. but this is his care for the people. Because what happens when he becomes unclean? It doesn't say that you can't go near your family. It says you can't serve as a priest. That's what's in view here. If you make yourself unclean by touching the dead or being whatever the restriction actually would be, then you need to stand down for a season anyway from your duties at the tabernacle. Let's keep rolling here.
Can I just throw something in
Sure.
there for Mandy's sake and for mine?
Yeah.
The Holman Bible, which is Al Mohler and,
Who?
others. Holman?
I'm kidding.
Oh,
Go ahead.
shoot. Says the exact same thing as NIV with the same
Little
footnote,
reference.
Same foot.
which is interesting.
So I'm just glad they put the footnote in there then, as you say. And there's, and in fairness, let's be fair. I don't read Hebrew. You guys don't read Hebrew. We end up using study Bibles. We end up using study aids. We have logos. We have things like that. And so you're doing the best you can. They're doing the best they can. And the fact that they put that footnote in there says, we're not 100% sure either. Could be this or could be that. And so I'll certainly accept your original observation and just say, I think the footnote would be where my preference would go. And I decide that, and I would just encourage you this as well. Contextually, what happens if a priest makes himself unclean? Does he get to go home? He does. Does he get to feed his kids? He does. Does he get to love his wife? He does. Does he get to serve at the tabernacle? He does not. And that seems to be contextually why I'm driven to say that this is him being a husband to the people of Israel. So, take that for what it's worth. Let's move on.
Husbandry is a word.
I'm sorry?
Husbandry.
Husbandry is a word, yeah. It's a word usually used associated with livestock and all that. You're helping them be healthy, you're helping them reproduce, you're helping them raise their young, etc. Yeah, good husbandry is something that shows up at farming. Very good. So, shaving portions of their head, shaving the edges of their beard, or making cuts on their body are all things that are just expressly prohibited. You don't make bald patches on your head, you don't shave off the edges of your beards, whatever that look like, and you don't make any cuts on the part of your body. Now, there would be no reason to prohibit those things if they didn't have some meaning or some significance that God did not want promoted. Maybe the cutting, okay, but why can't I shave my head in a certain way? Why can't I trim my beard in a certain way? And it's because those were practices of the nations around them, and you'll see some of them here. You shall not round up, yeah, Robert.
Well, is it monks that wear tonsures?
Those tonsures.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on Catholic, but I do remember seeing a lot of paintings of them with little bald spots on the top.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether what the significance of that is for them. Does anybody know? Do you know?
My heritage is priests who shaved the portion of the top of their head, which was, I read this just now and, oh, my ancestors were.
Yeah, well, why did they do that? So I don't know. And you know something, if they're your ancestors in 18th or 19th century, I'm not going to say necessarily, well, they were doing that because they really worship Baal or something like that, which is what's going on here. Marina.
We've been taught to take this in context. So he's talking about things that the priest can and can't do, and he's talking about dead people, and then he's talking about not doing these bald patches and stuff. I'm thinking it's because the bald patches and stuff was what the pagans did in response to death. So he's telling them, don't you do this in response to death. And my question is, so does that mean that these instructions are only in response to death? But if I want to shave my head in some odd or different way, that I'm not violating this?
I think I would agree with that. Let me tell you why. How many of you know that Leviticus says, don't get a tattoo? Right?
I've heard it,
Okay, well, it's in there.
but it's
And-
right here.
Yeah, and, well, we're gonna see it in a minute. But here's the issue. It says, do not cut yourself for the dead or get a tattoo. Meaning, there are things that you should not do symbolically, ceremonially for the dead. They're pagan practices. They kind of, I mean, what other religion has a God like our God who raises people from the dead so that death doesn't have the last word? And so we should, and they should, approach death differently than the nations around them did. And so, yeah, I believe you're probably right. Contextually, these are things that, okay, cut your hair any way you want, perhaps, I don't know. But if you're starting to do it, like if you're tearing your clothes, pulling out your hair, tattooing or cutting yourself because you're trying to get God's favor or something like that because Uncle Joe died, no, don't do that. That's what the pagan nations do, and you are not to be like them. Let's keep rolling. I think you'll see this.
I'm curious because I know that the Jews today, they do tear their clothes when someone dies.
Yeah, I don't know if you were here. Do you guys remember, when we first came across that, I think it was in Exodus as well, that prohibition exists. What did the high priest do at Jesus' trial? Tear his clothes. The very thing he was prohibited from doing, which among other things, I think, was just a pictorial way of saying the priesthood is passing from that guy to the guy who's on trial. That he forfeited his priesthood, and what perfect timing as the great high priest shows up.
And I always thought I could see, like a precursor to the tearing of the curtain when he tore his garment.
Good one.
You can see what now?
The precursor to the curtain ripping
Oh, yes, yeah.
when he tore his garment. He said
Yeah.
it was-
Yeah, a bunch of things are happening.
Yeah,
Yeah, his priesthood was ending.
yeah.
And he showed it by violating a number of things he violated at that trial. And then, of course, once the curtain is torn in two, there's no need for that kind of priest anymore because you have bold access yourself. Okay, let's keep rolling here. Okay, go ahead, Gloria.
I know I've seen a lot of Hindu movies where when the father dies, the sons always shave their whole head, and Hindu religion is like about 3,300 years old, so.
Yeah, and that kind of stuff happens. So let me give you an example. You all know this. You know the story of Elijah and the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. Elijah is challenging his own people because the people are not sure. Do we want 1 foot in Baal's camp and 1 foot in Yahweh's camp? You know, how should we conduct ourselves? And Elijah says, I wish you would make up your mind, essentially. And so he says, okay, let's have a showdown. And so they go to Mount Carmel, and they both arrange wood, and they both put a sacrifice on top of it. And then the challenge is, let's see whose God answers by fire. Prophets of Baal, the honor is yours, you go first. And here's what you read.
And they're cutting themselves. and
Yep.
stuff.
And they cried aloud and cut themselves after their custom with swords and lances until the blood gushed out upon them. And as midday passed, they raved on until the time of the offering of the oblation, but there was no voice, no one answered, no one paid attention. What a slam. You can dance all day long, you can cut yourselves, you can do everything possible, and the God that doesn't exist isn't going to answer. But the point of that is to say that's what the nations did. They would cut themselves. They would spill their blood in hopes of getting God's favor. Do you hear, can you think why this would be an absolute prohibition for an Israelite? Why don't you spill your blood to get God's favor?
2 reasons. Because he ordered you to spill animals' blood according to a certain protocol in a certain way as an offering to him. And he sent his own son to spill his perfect
Yeah.
blood to take the wrath and clean us.
Yeah, and both of them are true. And in immediate context, the first one would be, okay, no, we have animals that do this, substitutes. But the idea of substitution, you don't spill your own blood. A substitute dies in your place. And first it's an animal pointing towards somebody else who spilled their blood to gain God's favor. And so it's more than just a random prohibition to say, hey, I don't want you acting like the nations. It's like, no, I don't want you confusing what the gospel is. You're not made right with God because you spilled your own blood. You're made right with God because somebody else's blood was spilled. And so there's things woven into the law, woven into the relationship with God that prohibited that. Let's see, what else? That's done.
It's interesting, isn't it, that Hasidim don't cut the sides of their temples, the hair, and that's why they have those curls,
Okay,
you know, that they keep that in their.
so is it Hasidic Jews that do that?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, they take literally, apparently they don't cut, that's why it comes all the way down like this, so, yeah. I mean, I feel bad for them, because I want to ask them, tell me about your last trip to the temple. Tell me about your last unblemished sacrifice that you offered to the Lord. You know, I mean, I don't understand how they can keep going for 2,000 years now with no temple, and yet still try to cling to Mosaic law.
But in the end, God has a plan for the Jews, for Israel.
Let's see. Let's roll on here. We've talked about that. We've talked about the prophets of Baal did those things. Oh, okay. Deuteronomy. You are the sons of the Lord your God. You shall not cut yourselves or make any baldness on your foreheads for the dead. For you are a people holy to the Lord your God, and the Lord has chosen you to be a people for his treasured possession out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth. Here's the argument that I see here. Why were the prophets of Baal cutting themselves? In order to get their God to pay attention. Which is why it says at the end, no one answered. Nobody paid any attention to them. You're sons of the Lord your God. He's your father. Fathers pay attention to their sons. You don't need to cut yourself. You don't need to do all the things that the nations do, because he chose you. You are his treasured possession out of all the peoples of the earth. This is about God's wonderful relationship with his people, and how wrong it would be to think that you need to go through some elaborate ritual to get his attention. He pulled them out of Egypt. He remembered his promises. He remembered his covenant. He has delivered them from slavery. He's destroyed their enemies. He's feeding them. You're his sons, he says. And so don't think you need to do those extraordinary things. He loves you. He cares about you. He has adopted you into his family. All that elaborate stuff, the cutting, the shaving, all that stuff says something about your God that Yahweh does not want said about him. It says your God needs to be woken up. You need to get his favor. You need to get his attention. And God says, you've got my favor and you've got my attention. Let's see. So the higher standards. The people were told do and don't do certain things. You get to the priests, and all of a sudden there's some restriction, a higher standard. They have to be more careful not to make themselves unclean in any way. And the standards now are going to shift from basically kind of focusing on the practices of the surrounding nations and touching dead bodies and that, to marriage. Who can a priest marry? They shall not marry a prostitute or a woman who has been defiled. Neither shall they marry a woman divorced from her husband, for the priest is holy to his God. You shall sanctify him, for he offers the bread of your God. He shall be holy to you, for I, the Lord, who sanctify you, am holy. And the daughter of any priest, if she profanes herself by whoring, profanes her father, she shall be burned with fire. It's hard. This is a pretty blunt and hard text, but I want you to notice what it doesn't say. If a woman was a prostitute, no matter what she does, she repents, she joins Israel, is her life over? Is her hope of children or marriage over? No. What about Rahab? She couldn't marry a priest. She did something better. She married into the royal line of Judah, to Solomon. Father's Boaz. So I want to be real careful. This is more a restriction on the man than the woman. priests need to communicate something by who they choose to marry, and it needs to be a separation. It needs to be something that at least ceremonially stays away from uncleanness. But a divorced woman can be married. Not been defiled, whether that means fornication, whether that means what Dinah did, if you remember. Dinah very unwisely goes out to talk with the daughters of the land back in Genesis, and the prince of Shechem rapes her, and then says, well, now that that's done, is it okay if we get married? And so the priest could not have married Dinah, if the priest existed at that time. So there's restrictions, but it doesn't mean that the woman is restricted. In that she can be married, she can have a family, she can go on with a good and an ordinary life, but the priest is not to be a husband in that case.
Bruce,
Yes.
could a priest marry a widow?
Yes.
Let's see. Hang on real quickly. I think he can.
Yes.
I don't think the high priest, in fact, a high priest cannot. So I believe a priest can marry a widow. Anybody know any different? I didn't come across that in Leviticus.
I thought it said that she had to be a virgin.
High priest.
Okay.
So, and this is where we're going with this. You got standards for the people, you got standards for the priests, and you've got standards for the high priest. And it's interesting what's going to emerge from this, I think.
Bruce,
Yes.
if the high priest is sick or ceremonially unclean, is there someone else who can do what he's supposed to do?
Well, first off, sick would be the interesting one, because he was not supposed to leave the sanctuary specifically so he would not become accidentally ceremonially unclean.
Okay.
If he's the one wearing the outfit and who's been anointed, when he was serving, he did not leave the tabernacle.
Right, because he had to change his clothes if he was going to leave.
Well, not only that, but the actual reason given, once you walk outside, there's crowds, there's a couple million people. You're going to get bumped into by somebody who's unclean probably. And now the high priest got to wait again. And so during the time of his service, he was not to leave the tabernacle. Now, sickness is another thing, and that's a great question, and I don't know the answer to it.
How long was his service?
Along with what?
How long was his service?
Generally a year, I think, is at least when you get to, it doesn't say in Leviticus, to my knowledge.
Okay.
When you get to the New Testament, it talks about the high priest, it was his year that he was serving. I think it was a 12-month service then. So where that came from, I don't know.
Thank you.
Okay. So verse 9 makes us a bit squeamish, doesn't it? The daughter of any priest, if she profanes herself by whoring, profanes her father, she shall be burned with fire. This is what Judah had tried to have done to Tamar. Hey, she's guilty of some kind of fornication, bring her out and burn her with fire. Well, what's going on here? How can a gracious God write something like that?
They still did that with the witches because it was, acquainted with sin.
But I don't want to defend the Salem witch trial, and I doubt if you do either. Let me just give you my best stab. First off, we don't do it. This is a long ways back in another covenant, but it had to have some meaning in that covenant. And here's my best guess. She didn't grow up in a layman's home.
Right.
She grew up in a priest's home, which means all of her uncles were priests. Her grandfather was a priest because it was passed down through the family. She should have been surrounded by people who taught her. And she should have understood uncleanness, and she should have understood the impact of what her behavior would have on her father and her father's ministry. And so to do this, especially in that culture, to not just, it's interesting, whoring is a very disgusting word, but it's not, she slept with her boyfriend. This appears to be just a synonym for becoming a prostitute. She became a prostitute. And in the priest's family, in the priest's household, that is not to be tolerated. So, but, go ahead.
Would that indicate that she was probably consumed by a demon? Because with all that godly upbringing and surrounding of people and knowing for sure what the penalty would be,
Yeah.
I mean, how could you rationally choose that lifestyle, knowing that the second you got caught, poof, you're done?
Are we talking about tomorrow?
No, we're talking about verse 9.
Two things. One, Mary Magdalene had 7 demons cast out from her. And so it's kind of speculated that this was her background. So I would not want to separate out and say, well, no, there couldn't possibly be demonic influence and all that. The other thing is, though, where I'd push back a little bit, I know my own heart. I don't know that I need a demon in me to do some really stupid things that are going to destroy my life. And so, you know, some of you have had the heartbreak of raising kids who made the dumbest decisions after you have done your very best to introduce them to the Lord, to try to persuade them of that the ways of the Lord are life and good. You know, you go to Deuteronomy and say, you choose life or death. I mean, choose life that you might live. And on the one hand, why should I be scared of having capital punishment, but not be scared of the Lord? Because I will face him in judgment one day. So yes, maybe demonic thing, but in all honesty, I think that we're all capable of sins that people that really know would go, really? What were you thinking? So, but one of the reasons I think that this is so severely dealt with is it prevents her father from ministering. God had set apart her father to minister, to help the people. And now this is like, remember 1 Timothy 3? If you do not, let's see if I'll have the slide up here in a minute. If you don't manage your own household well, you don't get to be an elder, is what it says. And in all honesty, there have been times where some of my kids have kind of been walking along the edge there, and I've gone to the other elders and I've said, tell me if I need to stand down for a while until this is dealt with. Quite frankly, I don't know many pastors or elders who have not asked that same question. When your kids become teenagers, your voice becomes very quiet sometimes, and other voices speak to them loudly, and they do dumb things. And the question is, are you handling it the way you should handle it? Are you just letting it go? Kids will be kids. Or are you pleading with them, praying for them, confessing your struggles to the people that you're accountable to, and then being ready to say, yeah, I think that this is kind of spun out of control in such a way that you should stand down for a season. Now, when your kid is 40 years old, they're accountable to God on their own. They're not part of your household anymore, no matter where they're living. But all that to say, her behavior impacts her father's ministry, and it seems to be that one of the reasons why it's, oh, here it is. He must manage his own household well, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church? That's a New Testament application with no fire, no stoning, no death involved, but still the qualification for a spiritual leader. So in the Old Covenant, some significant consequences for the person who defiled her father, it says, so that her father cannot serve the Lord. In the New Testament, it simply means if your kids are not essentially well behaved, you're probably not ready to serve in that way. Okay. So those are some of the higher standards for when a priest is involved. They impact who you bury, who you marry, and how your kids behave. The standards now, as Heidi mentioned already, are going to become even higher when the high priest is involved. Here it goes. The priest who is chief among his brothers, on whose head the anointing oil is poured, and who has been consecrated to wear the garments, shall not let the hair of his head hang loose, nor tear his clothes. He shall not go into any dead bodies, nor make himself unclean, even for his father or for his mother. He shall not go out of the sanctuary, lest he profane the sanctuary of his God, for the consecration of the anointing oil of his God is on him. I am the Lord. So the priest who's chief is the chief priest, that's the high priest. It goes from a priest who can only touch or handle or help with the burial of the immediate family to a high priest who can't even bury his own mother or father in the sense of at least handling them. Where it goes beyond that, I don't know, or if it goes beyond that, I don't know. He's not to grieve in quite the same way other people do. You don't let the hair of your head hang loose. You rip off the turban that you're supposed to be wearing, your hair falls down, you rip your clothes. Those would be normal expressions of grief. You're not to grieve as other people grieve in this. I mentioned this before. Do you remember what David was told when when he gets word that his son Absalom had died? I think it's Abner or Joab, I can't remember, goes to him. So the army is out pursuing Absalom, who wants his father dead, David dead, so that he can assume the throne. The army goes out and risks their life to protect David. Absalom dies, he's killed. Somebody comes back and tells David, and David begins to mourn. And the commander of the army comes to him and he says, "Don't you dare. These men risked their life for you, and you have an allegiance to the kingdom and an allegiance to the men who risked your life for you that transcends your allegiance to your son." And he says, if you keep this up, there won't be a man standing with you come morning.
Mm-hmm.
And David shut up. It's natural that he would mourn Absalom. It's also not permitted, at least not publicly, because he has a higher duty. The priest has a higher duty. He is not to mourn as other people mourn, at least not publicly. Let's see.
Bruce, you want to go back to what happened with Aaron and his 2 sons? What Moses commanded them?
Yeah, remind me, I think he's told the same thing, don't mourn, right?
Exactly, yeah. Don't
Don't
tear
mourn.
your clothes,
Thank you.
don't tear your hair, don't
Yeah.
do anything. You're staying right where you're at. You're going to continue serving. Let the rest of the people mourn.
Here's the thing. Let's just be real transparent and honest. When we lose somebody that we love a great deal, it's hard not to wrestle with, why did God take them? And you're wrestling with the kindness of God and the justice of God and all that. When you're a spiritual leader, there should be something settled, that God is only ever just, that he does no wrong, that you have no foundation upon which to judge him. And that should be reflected in, at the very least, a different kind of mourning that doesn't have you wailing and tearing your clothes and pulling your turban off. Heidi?
We weep as those who have hope.
Yeah, we grieve, but not as those who have no hope. And the high priest ought to lead in that. So I'm not saying that that when a leader loses a loved one, you're not going to see tears, or you're not going to see just genuine heartbroken sadness. But it shouldn't be the same as somebody who doesn't know the Lord, who lost somebody who doesn't know the Lord. It should be with a conviction that underneath all this understandable sadness, there is a good God who only ever, all things work together for good. Well, not the death of my fill in the blank. You don't get to make the exceptions, and the priest needs to lead in that. So, chief priest was to be totally dedicated to the tabernacle service above and beyond the regular priest. He doesn't go in and out. He doesn't risk touching something unclean because then he can't serve. Let's see. It's just we only have a couple of minutes here, and I want to get to something. Do you guys know what the Billy Graham rule is? You don't get in a car with a woman who's not your wife. That was the Billy Graham rule. Why? Especially when Billy's 70 years old, okay? But he had, you don't even have an appearance of impropriety. You set a standard that reflects holiness. And Billy Graham, and I would not endorse him 100% in every last little bit of theology, but what a good man and a great man who gave his life to try to lead others to the Lord. He didn't want anybody to say unclean, unholy, and have his testimony to the Lord be compromised. That's what you're seeing here. To the priests, it's an early version of the Billy Graham rule. Don't do anything that would make people question whether you were clean, whether you were dedicated, whether the God you served was holy and righteous. So, the standards for dead bodies just ramped up again. Now you can't even bury your father or mother. The marriage requirements, and this is where we'll end, ramped up again. And he shall take, this is the high priest, he shall take a wife in her virginity, a widow or a divorced woman, or a woman who has been defiled or a prostitute. These he shall not marry. But he shall take as his wife a virgin of his own people, that he may not profane his offspring among his people, for I am the Lord who sanctifies him. Now remember, we've talked about unclean not being sinful. Profane simply means common. I mean, we hear it and we think, well, and it is a bad thing. It's a profane thing, for example, to take the Lord's name in vain, to treat it as though it were a common name and not a name that deserved reverence. So that's why we call it profanity. But it just really means common. So if you treat God as common, that's a really bad thing, in which case, profane is terrible. But to have common children from a common mother, profane mother, is not a bad thing. It's just prohibited for the high priest. It's not what God wants imaged forth from the high priest. So there's a standard, a virgin, only a virgin, and from your own people. I'm not sure if that means an Israelite woman or actually from the tribe of Levi. We're not told. So here's my question, and this will kind of give us where we want to end. Is this a curse on the woman? Is this saying, I'm sorry, once you're like that, you just toss her on the trash heap?
No,
Is this an indictment on the woman?
no.
It's not. I agree.
It's a maintenance of God's holiness.
I agree with that, but I want to go beyond that. I think it's an indictment on the limitations of the priest. And here's why. And we'll just zip through it because it's 10 o'clock. The high priest in that day had no power to make anybody clean. He couldn't marry a prostitute or a woman who had been defiled and turn her into a virgin. There's a priest coming who does exactly that. Let's look at it. Husband, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by washing of the water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. Look at the language. Splendor, without spot, without wrinkle, holy, without blemish. How does that happen? Christ loves them. He gives himself up for them. He cleanses them. And then he goes about the business of sanctifying her, making her holy. To what end? And she's like a virgin at the end. And that's not my imagination. Here is what Paul says later. For I feel a divine jealousy for you, since I betrothed you to one husband, to present you as a pure virgin to Christ. Who's that written to?
Corinthians.
The Corinthians. What were they known for?
Sexual
Prostitution,
sin.
homosexuality, sleeping with their stepmother. They were about as corrupt sexually as you could possibly get. And Paul says, you used to be that way. You're not anymore. My goal of introducing you to Christ was that you might be presented as a pure virgin. The high priest couldn't do that. He had to marry a virgin because he couldn't make a virgin. He could not cleanse somebody. He could not make them new. Christ can. And so it's interesting. I see that limitation in Leviticus as an indictment of the limitations of the high priest. He's got to marry a virgin because one day there's going to be a high priest who marries a virgin. The difference being he's got to marry her in that state, and he takes her in the state he finds her and makes her that. That's glorious. Do you know that that's you? That no matter what your background is, if you are united to Christ with faith, you will one day need words like splendor to describe you. Without spot, without blemish, without any fault whatsoever. No matter your background, you'll be considered rightly and truly as a pure virgin, because that's what Christ does. And so Leviticus, instead of this strange little, why can't he do that? I think it's to say he's got to image forth something that's going to happen that's even better. He's got to marry a virgin because you can't make one, because a priest is coming who's going to marry a virgin who did make one. I told you I was going to end with something here that I found interesting. This is, that's 22. We can read. So, this is the mockery of Dr. Laura, and ultimately the mockery of Leviticus and a little bit of Exodus in here. I hope you can see the humor in it, but I'm really doing it because this is the world you're going to go out into. And one of the reasons I wanted us to understand Leviticus better, because if anybody wants to mock any book out there, this is the book. Leviticus 25:44 states that I may possess slaves, both male and female, provided they are purchased from neighboring nations. A friend of mine claims that this applies to Mexicans, but not Canadians. Can you clarify? Why can't I own Canadians? How many Canadians are in here? We lost one. And Monique just walked out. But utterly inappropriate. I'm glad that somebody else wrote it, but that's their mocking of Leviticus and trying to bring it into a contemporary, because, and here's why, Dr. Laura took something from Leviticus and said it applies today. So this is what they're doing. They're saying, okay, you want to apply Leviticus to today? I would like to sell my daughter into slavery, as sanctioned in Exodus 21:7. In this day and age, what do you think would be a fair price for her? Leviticus 21:20 states that I may not approach the altar of God if I have a defect in my sight. I have to admit, I'm wearing reading glasses. Does my vision have to be 20/20, or is there some wiggle room here? When I burn a bull on the altar as a sacrifice, I know it creates a pleasing odor for the Lord, Leviticus 1:9. The problem is my neighbors. They claim the odor is not pleasing to them. Should I smite them? A friend of mine feels that even though eating shellfish is an abomination, Leviticus 11:10, it is a lesser abomination than homosexuality. I don't agree. Can you settle this? Are there degrees of abomination? I have a neighbor who insists on working on the Sabbath. Exodus 35:2 clearly states that he should be put to death. Am I morally obligated to kill him myself, or should I ask the police to do it? Most of my male friends get their hair trimmed, including the hair around their temples, even though this is expressly forbidden by Leviticus 19:27. How should they die? So, this is the world looking at Leviticus and saying, I cannot believe you are so simple, so Neanderthal, so cruel as to consider this book part of Scripture. What kind of God do you worship? One of the reasons we're going through Leviticus is that so you will never win the person. I don't want to say never. God can do whatever he wants. It is unlikely that anything you say will win this person over. They seem pretty set on just mocking things, not asking for understanding, but claiming they have it and mocking it. But I want you to know what's going on in Leviticus and how good it is and how it points to Christ and how it's not random, cruel, odd things, but God is preparing you and preparing his people to recognize the Messiah when he comes, what kind of work he will do when he comes, what he will do in you when he comes. So that's it. It is 10:08. We have a church meeting in here right after service, and so Jeff has asked that we fold up the tables, roll them back and put them behind the screen there, and arrange the chairs here. We'll get a few more out. So let me just close this in prayer real quick. Father God, thank you for your word. I want to especially thank you that all the requirements that the high priest had are met by you, but in a far more glorious way. I want to thank you that you take the most broken and sinful of people and make them pure. There is gospel promise in Leviticus, and I just pray that we will see it and treasure it. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Say, Jake,